Okay, let's talk about jobs. Specifically, the journey of your career. You hear so much conflicting advice, don't you?
Oh, definitely.
Stay loyal, build tenure, that's how you get ahead. Or wait, isn't it always about like being ready to jump for more money?
Yeah. Or never leave without another job lined up.
Right, but also don't look desperate. It can feel like navigating a maze where the rules just keep changing.
It really is a puzzle because the world of work has fundamentally shifted. That old career map,
Yeah.
it's been redrawn.
Absolutely. And that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive today. A listener shared just a whole stack of fascinating sources with us.
Oh, interesting. What kind of stuff?
Everything from official U.S. labor stats and industry reports to, academic research, articles from places like Forbes, Coursera, Harvard Business Review,
So,
insights from workforce data companies like Revelio Labs and Aura Intelligence, advice from recruiters at Ivy Exec and Four Corner Resources, and even some real-world anecdotes pulled straight from a Reddit thread.
wow, that's a rich mix. So you get the big picture trends and the personal stories too.
Exactly. Our mission today is to sift through all this material, pull out the most important nuggets of, well, knowledge and insight, and figure out what's really happening with career progression right now.
Makes sense.
We're going to focus specifically on this growing phenomenon of job hopping, trying to understand the actual data behind it, the powerful forces driving people to move more often,
Hmm.
what this truly means for your career path, and, how employers are grappling with this new reality. Let's figure out what you need to know to navigate this evolving landscape effectively.
It's certainly a timely topic for, well, pretty much anyone thinking about their professional future.
Couldn't agree more. So where do we begin this exploration, this changing career landscape?
Well, I think we have to start by acknowledging the traditional ideal, right? The vision of the company man or company woman,
Uh-huh.
someone who dedicates decades to one organization, builds deep loyalty, long tenure. That was like the gold standard for generations.
Oh. But the data paints a very different picture today, doesn't it? What are we actually seeing? Like, how long are people staying in their jobs now?
Yeah, the numbers show a clear trend towards shorter stays,
Mm.
particularly for younger workers.
Yeah.
According to data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, that's the main federal agency tracking this stuff.
Right.
The median number of years employees had been with their current employer was just 3.9 years in January 2024.
3.9 years median. Wow.
And that's actually down slightly from 4.1 years just 2 years before that.
So not exactly a lifetime commitment anymore?
Not for the median person, no. And the contrast gets even, well, starker when you break it down by age groups.
Right.
For older workers, say 65 and over, the median tenure is still pretty long, around 9.8 years. They kind of represent that more traditional model.
Right, so that's maybe the boomer or silent generation perspective. What about the younger folks?
Well, for younger workers, the numbers just plummet. It's only 0.7 years for 16 to 17-year-olds,
Hmm.
0.4 years for those aged 20 to 24, and 2.7 years for the 25 to 34 age bracket.
Wow. Less than 3 years median for people in their late 20s and early 30s. That's a massive generational difference.
It really is.
It seems like the company man is being replaced by the strategic hopper, maybe?
It does kind of look that way. And there's data from a Career Sidekick survey that backs this up. It showed the average individual changes jobs about every 2.73 years.
Okay.
And the frequency is even higher for many. 42% of the people they surveyed switch every 1 to 2 years. And get this, 62% reported leaving a job within the first year.
Leaving within the first year for over 60% in that survey. That single stat tells you so much about how the norms have shifted.
It's huge. And if we zoom in on Gen Z, the youngest generation in the workforce now, specialized data from Revelio Labs really highlights an acceleration here.
Okay, what do they find?
They found Gen Z workers, like after age 21, average just 1 year per company.
1 year.
1 year. And in just 2.8 years in the workforce, they've already worked for an average of 2.7 companies.
So nearly 3 companies in under 3 years for Gen Z. That's incredibly rapid movement compared to, well, historical norms.
Exactly. And Revelio Labs also noted that in their first 3 years after turning 21, Gen Z explores more industries, 2.1 on average, and more roles, about 2.2 on average, than previous generations did at that same career stage.
They're really exploring and experimenting quickly.
very quickly.
Okay, so the numbers are undeniable. Shorter tenures are the reality, especially for younger generations. They're clearly embracing mobility. But let's get to the why. What are the main drivers pushing people to move more frequently today?
Well, there are multiple factors at play, definitely.
Yeah.
But often the most compelling driver is financial money.
Right. Is there solid data showing that switching jobs actually leads to bigger paychecks, or is that just, anecdotal?
Oh, no, it's absolutely backed by data.
Hmm.
ADP, the big payroll company.
Yeah.
Their data consistently shows job switchers get significantly higher wage increases than people who stay put. Their analysis showed switchers got, I think it was 7.6% higher wage growth compared to stayers.
Over 7% just for switching. That's a pretty powerful incentive right there.
It is, and a longer-term study by PayScale, the compensation data company,
Mm.
they found that professionals who stayed at the same company for more than 4 years actually earned, on average, 20% less over their entire careers than those who strategically moved between jobs.
20% less over a career. That statistic is just, wow, it's staggering. It really highlights the potential financial cost of staying stagnant.
It really does, and it points to a common dynamic, right? Companies are often willing to pay a premium to attract new talent with specific skills they need now,
Mm-hmm.
rather than consistently giving equivalent, substantial raises to reward and keep their existing high performers.
Yeah, you hear that a lot.
And we saw anecdotal evidence of this even in that Reddit thread you mentioned. People reporting like dramatic increases, tripling or even 5xing their TC, their total compensation,
Right, TC.
just through strategic job changes.
Okay, so money is clearly a huge factor. What's another major driver then?
Well, beyond the money, accelerated skill acquisition and just gaining broader experience is a massive benefit of moving around.
How so? I mean, doesn't staying longer let you become a deep expert in one thing?
It can, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But changing roles or companies exposes you to a wider variety of challenges, different technologies, new ways of doing things, different tools,
Mm-hmm.
and often entirely different industries or company cultures.
Hmm.
Think about that example from Four Corner Resources, the recruiting firm. They talked to a cybersecurity analyst
Okay.
at a big established company. Maybe they specialize in enterprise systems, compliance, very structured. But if they move to a startup, suddenly they might be dealing with cutting-edge cloud security threats, building protocols from scratch.
Right. Completely different skills needed, different pace, different tech stack, everything.
Exactly. That kind of diverse exposure builds a much broader, more versatile, and frankly, often more marketable skill set than staying in one very specific lane for a really long time.
I imagine each move also just naturally grows your professional network.
Precisely. Every new job means new colleagues, potential mentors, industry contacts. Building relationships across multiple organizations expands your network significantly. That could open doors down the road you might not even see if you stayed siloed in one place.
That makes sense. It also seems like people are moving just to find a better fit, right? Both for the role itself and maybe the company culture.
Now, that's a huge piece.
Yeah.
Job hopping, especially earlier in a career, allows for active exploration. You learn what kind of work you actually enjoy, what your strengths are,
Yeah.
what kind of team or company culture suits you best. It helps you figure out your preferences and long-term goals faster than if you just stayed put.
And it lets you escape bad situations too, I guess.
Absolutely. It provides an escape route from, genuinely toxic environments or roles that offer no clear path for growth. The Career Sidekick survey actually cited those as major reasons people leave.
And we saw that concept of shift shock mentioned too, didn't we, in the Coursera and the Muse sources?
Yes, shift shock.
Yeah.
It's that feeling when a new job just isn't what you expected.
Mm.
The reality is way different from the interview or the job description.
Mm-hmm.
And that survey found 41% of Gen Z and millennials were willing to quit a new job pretty quickly, like within 2 to 6 months, if it caused significant strain or just wasn't the right fit.
So they're less likely to feel obligated to just stick it out if it's clearly not working.
Exactly. They seem more pragmatic about cutting their losses.
Beyond these individual choices, though, aren't there also just structural changes in the market itself that make moving around more common?
Absolutely. Things like layoffs and reorganizations, which firms like Revelio Labs track, are unfortunately common now. They can force unexpected moves.
Right.
Plus, side gigs, contract work, project-based roles, they're all much more mainstream. The whole idea of a single, stable, linear career path at just one or two companies, it's simply less of a guarantee for most people today.
And finally, what about generational values, especially with Gen Z entering the workforce during, well, such a turbulent time with the pandemic and everything?
Yeah, Revelio Labs highlighted that. Younger workers, Shaped partly by entering the workforce during the pandemic, they tend to prioritize flexibility, work-life balance, purpose, and just overall well-being more strongly, perhaps, than some previous generations did.
So it's not necessarily disloyalty.
Not necessarily. Their higher mobility is often a pragmatic response. They're navigating an uncertain market and trying to find roles that actually align better with their priorities and values.
Okay, so from the employee side, the motivations and benefits seem pretty clear. Better pay, faster skill growth, bigger networks, finding the right fit, adapting to reality, aligning with values. But let's flip the script now. How do employers actually perceive this trend? Is that old stigma of job hopping still a major hurdle?
Well, the perception of instability hasn't vanished entirely. That's important to acknowledge.
Okay.
Some hiring managers, particularly those maybe with more traditional career paths themselves, might still see frequent changes as a potential red flag. Like Four Corner Resources noted, from their recruiter viewpoint, some clients still specifically ask for candidates with longer tenures. You still hear the no-job hoppers request sometimes.
Because they're thinking about the cost of recruiting, onboarding, training, and worrying if the person will just leave again quickly.
Exactly. They're questioning commitment and, the return on investment. This concern can be stronger in industries where deep institutional knowledge or complex regulatory stuff is critical, like maybe law, education, certain government roles.
Makes sense. What does the employer side data tell us about, say, internal movement versus hiring externally?
Aura Intelligence, that company analyzing workforce dynamics using external signals.
Right, tracking promotions and moves based on public data.
Yeah. They have some interesting insights. They confirm internal promotion patterns are often still tied to company review cycles, usually peaking in January or March.
Okay.
But they also note that the consistency of these internal promotion windows seems to be weakening. That could potentially mean fewer predictable opportunities for advancement within a company compared to looking outside.
Huh. So if you're waiting for that internal promotion cycle, the window might actually be shrinking in some places.
It could be. And Aura's data shows differences by sector too. Like advanced manufacturing and services have relatively higher internal promotion rates, around 4.1%. But sectors like energy, resources, and utilities lag way behind, around 2.1%.
And their data also tracks when people leave, right?
Yeah.
Exit patterns.
Yes, and interestingly, that often aligns with review cycles too. They see peaks in people leaving in January, May, and August.
Ah.
Aura sees this exit data as a really critical window into things like employee satisfaction and engagement. For instance, professional services shows high churn rates, like 15.1%,
Wow.
whereas energy resources and utilities have much lower churn, only 2.6%. That tells you something about the work culture, the opportunities, maybe the stability in those different sectors.
They also mentioned gender disparities in promotions, didn't they?
They did. Aura Intelligence points out that female promotion rates can be more volatile and still lag behind in certain sectors, like energy and utilities, even as overall trends might be changing. They really emphasize that companies need deliberate strategies for leadership development to address these imbalances.
So employers are definitely using data to understand these trends. But let's challenge an old assumption for a second. Is long job tenure always a good thing for productivity, even from the employer's perspective?
That's a great question. And Alp Consulting, drawing on some academic research, presents a really thought-provoking, kind of counterintuitive idea here.
Okay.
They argue that long job tenure isn't necessarily the most beneficial thing for productivity, especially in modern, knowledge-intensive roles.
Really? That goes against decades of conventional wisdom. Why would staying longer decrease productivity?
Well, the research suggests there can be what they call a curvilinear relationship.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means productivity might initially increase
Yeah.
as you gain experience and master a role, which makes sense. But after a certain point, it can plateau or even start to decrease.
Why?
Might be due to boredom, maybe complacency, a lack of new challenges, or simply not being exposed to fresh ideas or different ways of working from outside the organization.
Huh. So for both the individual and potentially the company, staying put for too long might actually lead to stagnation.
Precisely. Now, the optimal tenure point probably varies depending on the complexity of the job. Maybe it's shorter for routine tasks, longer for very complex strategic roles. But the idea that infinite tenure equals infinite productivity, that's just not supported by this research.
So what does that mean for HR?
Well, Alp Consulting argues this requires a paradigm shift in how HR departments think about talent.
Instead of just valuing years of service, they need to value what continued growth and contribution.
Exactly. They suggest companies might need to actively rewire job profiles for their long-tenured employees, give them new challenges, new responsibilities to keep them engaged and productive.
Hmm.
And Aura Intelligence kind of reinforces this. They point to the need for companies to move towards more dynamic, skills-based development programs, not just static, check-the-box training.
Especially because skills, particularly in areas like AI or data analysis, are evolving so incredibly fast right now.
Yes, exactly. Companies need ways to identify and develop skills dynamically across their workforce. Old static approaches just don't work when the demand for future skills is concentrated and changing so quickly. They found companies using AI-enabled workforce strategies are better positioned to adapt.
Okay, so the landscape is clearly dynamic for both sides. Let's get practical. If you, the listener, do have a resume with frequent moves, how do you handle that in an interview, given that some of that old stigma might still exist?
Right. This is where preparing your narrative becomes absolutely crucial. And both Ivy Exec and Four Corner Resources offered some excellent practical advice here.
Okay, what's the approach?
Well, the first rule is honesty, but framed constructively. You need to be prepared to explain why you left each role.
Hmm.
And there are plenty of valid reasons, right? Maybe the role changed significantly from what was described. Maybe there was a genuine lack of growth opportunities despite your efforts. Maybe it was a toxic work environment you needed to leave. Or maybe you were just in an industry like startups or advertising where shorter stints are actually pretty common.
So focus on the reason why and make sure it sounds professional and, well, positive, even if the situation itself wasn't ideal. Don't badmouth previous employers.
Precisely. Avoid bad-mouthing. You want to frame your moves as intentional steps forward, not just escapes from something bad.
Yeah.
Emphasize what you gained at each position.
Okay.
Focus on the specific skills you acquired, the diverse experiences you had, what you learned about your own preferences and career goals in each place.
So articulate the moves as part of a strategic journey.
Exactly. Frame your frequent changes as a strategic choice.
Mm.
Maybe you were intentionally seeking faster advancement than was available internally. Maybe you were exploring different facets of your field to find the right niche. Or maybe you were deliberately building a broad, versatile skill set early in your career. You can even, slightly modify job titles or responsibilities on your resume or LinkedIn, as long as it's truthful, to better reflect the work you actually did and show that progression or varied experience.
And should you bring up the pattern yourself or wait for them to ask?
The advice seems to be, address it proactively. It shows self-awareness and confidence.
Yeah.
You might group shorter stints together if they were part of a specific phase. Like, early in my career, I explored a few different environments to really identify the best fit for my long-term goals. Something like that. And crucially, you need to reassure the interviewer that while you may have moved frequently in the past, you are now looking for a longer-term opportunity, specifically with their company, assuming that's genuinely your intention, of course.
Right.
The key is demonstrating commitment to this role in this organization right now.
So you're basically turning the potential red flags into a narrative of intentional growth and strategic exploration.
That's absolutely the goal.
Okay, let's wrap things up by maybe busting a few common myths about switching jobs, pulling from some of the wisdom in that HBR article we looked at.
Good idea.
First myth, the 2-year rule. You absolutely must stay at a job for at least 2 years or you'll instantly damage your resume forever. True or false?
Oh, definitely false now. The 2-year rule is largely outdated. As we've seen from all the data, shorter tenures are much, much more common, especially for younger workers.
Right.
A few shorter stints, particularly if you frame them correctly to show what you gained, they're just not the career killer they might once have been perceived as.
Okay. How about this one? Never, ever leave a job until you have the next one perfectly lined up.
Also, largely a myth, although, obviously there's a financial risk for many people.
Sure.
But the idea that any gap on your resume is a disaster just isn't accurate anymore. Resume gaps are far more common and accepted today, especially post-pandemic.
Why is that?
Well, people have gaps due to layoffs, personal health issues, family responsibilities, even burnout. While having the next job secured is definitely ideal, it's not always possible or necessary. Particularly if staying in your current role is genuinely harming your well-being or involves, say, ethical compromises.
So if life happens or a job is truly awful, taking some time off isn't necessarily a scarlet letter anymore.
Exactly. Employers are much more used to seeing and understanding them now. Just be prepared to explain it briefly and professionally.
Okay. Myth number 3. You should never make a lateral move. It's only worth changing jobs if it's a promotion and a big pay bump.
False. That's another really outdated idea tied to those old hierarchical career ladders.
Hmm.
In today's often flatter organizations, there aren't always endless levels to climb up. And as HBR notes, while money and title matter, research shows that beyond a certain point, just getting more money doesn't necessarily correlate with big increases in job satisfaction or happiness.
So you should focus on what else the move might offer besides just title or salary.
Precisely. A lateral move that offers you increased autonomy, maybe the chance to develop valuable new skills mastery, a stronger sense of purpose, or even just better work-life balance. That can be incredibly valuable for your long-term career trajectory and your personal fulfillment, even without a promotion or a huge raise attached.
That makes a lot of sense. And finally, should you always wait for a counteroffer from your current employer before you accept a new job and quit?
HBR suggests this is also a myth you don't need to follow. While your current employer might make a counteroffer if they really value you, your decision to leave should really be based on what's best for your long-term goals and needs.
Right, the reasons you started looking in the first place.
Exactly. Those reasons probably still exist even if they offer more money. So don't feel obligated to wait around for a counteroffer if you've already decided the new opportunity is the right path forward for you.
It really does seem like so much of the old conventional wisdom about career progression is just that old.
The world of work has fundamentally changed, and our strategies for navigating it just have to evolve too.
So pulling all this together from our deep dive today, the world of career progression is, well, it's more fluid and dynamic than ever before. Job hopping isn't just some fringe activity anymore.
Yeah.
It's an increasingly common strategy, particularly for younger workers, and it's driven by some significant upsides like higher earning potential and faster skill development.
But as we discussed, that doesn't mean it's without challenges. That old perception of instability hasn't completely vanished, and you absolutely need to be prepared to manage that perception and effectively reframe your story.
And employers are also adapting, right? They're using data to understand these mobility patterns, and they're being pushed to rethink how they retain talent. Moving towards more dynamic, skills-based approaches to employee development to keep people productive rather than just relying on long tenure.
Exactly. And ultimately, there's no single universal rule for how long you should stay at any given job. It's a deeply personal and strategic decision. It needs to be based on your individual goals, the specific industry you're in, and what you are genuinely getting or not getting from your current role and workplace.
Yeah, it feels less like following some prescribed path and much more like strategically building a portfolio of experiences over time.
Which I think raises a really fundamental question for you, the listener, to consider as you navigate your own path.
Mm.
In a world where job mobility is clearly rising, and even traditional long tenure, as we saw, can sometimes have downsides for productivity, is the very concept of a single linear career ladder becoming obsolete? Or is the real challenge now about how you strategically weave together all these diverse experiences from multiple roles and companies to build a unique, adaptable, and ultimately resilient professional identity for yourself?